kept people in their places for a number of years have now been expired, and so there's like this steady flow of evictions that are taking place that a lot of folks are not, maybe not aware of or cognizant of unless you're in that situation. There's also the mental health crisis that is impacting the United States. Partly, I mean, I think COVID has had a detrimental impact on our collective anxiety and mental health. There's a lot of people got disconnected from their doctors, and a lot of people got disconnected from their care, and now they are worse off than they were even 2 years ago. I can tell you that in the streets, I have bumped into several people who we had helped get off the streets several years back. Now they're back in the streets because of the pandemic and the shifts in the jobs and everything that happened. So all that to say, I understand the context of what we are in right now in terms of being in this moment in time. Homelessness is definitely a significant issue, and it's something that unfortunately is not getting much better by the day. So I feel like part of the solution to this issue is for average people to become more knowledgeable, become more empowered. I don't believe that we are all responsible for helping everybody, but I do think that each of us can be responsible for helping someone. We don't have to do everything, but we can do something. So with that, I'd love to take some questions around like, what can I do? What kind of help can be offered? What kind of help is being offered? What's the city doing? Anything like that's fair game. Again, I'm a dork about this stuff. I geek out on this. I read about this way more often than my wife would probably prefer. So I'd love to take some questions and see what you guys think. If anyone has any, or I can just riff, either way.
Well, I mean, one of the things that I would love for you to riff on is the myths.
Yeah. Yeah, I really believe that the stigma of homelessness is one of the leading contributors to the problem on a macro level. Because what happens is we blame the victim. When we blame the victim of circumstance, we then become sort of absolved from doing anything about it. So I've studied this a lot and I've looked at it a lot. I've talked to thousands of volunteers, and what I've identified is that there are 4 main misconceptions about people who are experiencing homelessness. The first is that they're lazy. This is a very common assumption that people make about people in the street. They're lazy. Why don't they just get a job? I can't even tell you how many times I've talked to people who said, well, if that guy holding the door open at McDonald's would just go in and apply, maybe he wouldn't have to be holding the door open. This is an obvious, if you peel back that layer even just a little bit, you realize how ridiculous it is. The fact is that surviving in the street is hard work. People have to work twice as hard to get half as far. The fact is that homelessness in and of itself requires a huge amount of effort just to get your most basic needs met. So if we think about it through the lens of laziness, if we think that it's a character flaw that this person is dealing with, then we again are absolved from actually trying to help that person. When in reality, getting a job is not always enough to pay the bills. The national, the minimum wage in this country is $7.25 an hour, I believe still. In New York, I believe it's $15 an hour, but the average rental cost ends up being, for an average 1-bedroom, is like $1,400 at a minimum. And so if you're making minimum wage, you're gonna have to work like 60 hours a week just to afford the barest and the most basic apartment possible, unless you get help. And so there's these dynamics that we look at, we're like, oh, we'll just get a job. Well, the problem is many people who are homeless have multiple jobs. And so there's studies actually that show that. So being lazy is not actually an indicator that someone might end up homeless. In fact, again, like I shared earlier, some of the hardest working people I know are homeless. So you wake up in the morning on the sidewalk, and likely you were moved by a police officer or a security guard or someone called 311, an outreach team member comes and wakes you up, and then you have, you got to find food, you got to find a bathroom, you got to find something, but you don't have money to get on the train, so you're going to have to either risk getting, swiped on and asking someone for help, or you're going to have to, sneak on somehow and risk getting a ticket or getting arrested. And so even just getting from point A to point B can be a limit. The other thing about jobs is that I don't know if you've filled out a job application recently, but under your name, there's the next box. Can anyone tell me what the next box is usually in a job application after name? Address. Yes. So if you do not have an address, you are in trouble. Then the other thing you have to provide is social security card, birth certificate, driver's license. These are things that are very easily lost when you're in the street. I know a guy who lived with my family for 2 years who took him all those 2 years just to get his green card back. He was here legally, he had everything he needed, but when his bag was stolen on the subway, he lost his green card, his driver's license, and any documentation that he had with him. And so you can't just walk in the DMV and say, I am who I say I am. That doesn't account for anything. You have to be able to show ID to get ID. You need to have a job to get a place. You need a place then to get a job. So there's like these conflicting realities that lead people to get stuck. So that's the first thing, is that they're lazy, which is complete hogwash. The other next one I would say that I've identified is that they are dangerous. They're scary. This is something that we see in the news, right? Like the media is not going around finding random homeless people who are doing acts of kindness and doing stories on them. I have yet to see that. There's very little highlighting of the benefits that people in the street are bringing to their communities. Cleaning up trash, holding doors, greeting people with a smile, singing a song. No one cares about those stories. But there's that one guy who acts crazy and does something stupid, and that's like all of a sudden full court press, and everybody is like, oh, well, see, homeless people are dangerous. When in reality, again, I would say that I've been to many hockey games, I've been to many basketball games, many concerts, and I can honestly say that I have seen as many fights and dangerous people at those events as I have at outreach, at City Relief. So the fact is that danger is not intrinsic to homelessness, it's intrinsic to humanity. And so the reality is that many people who are the most dangerous sometimes get let off the hook. So that's the other thing, is that they're dangerous. The last one, the next two, is that they're addicted. This is so common, we assume they're addicts. Again, we see people who are in the street, we talk to people and we're like, oh, well, that person is a representation of everybody. Well, just because someone on the street is addicted doesn't mean that all people are addicted who are homeless. And the numbers bear that out. So the idea that they're addicts is also a misnomer. And again, it absolves me from helping them, because I don't want to give them money because they'll spend it on their addiction, and that would be bad. And so I don't want to do that. So that person's probably an addict, and I want to help them. When in reality, again, the odds of them spending that money for their addiction is not any higher than it is that they would spend it on food or a MetroCard or whatever else they say that they're going to spend it on. And then lastly, I would say the other thing is mental illness. There's this, again, we assume that someone in the street is mentally ill. But what I would tell you and what I would argue is that there are just as many people who are in the street who are struggling with mental illness as a result of their homelessness as there are people who are in the street dealing with their homelessness as a result of their mental illness. Does that make sense? There are people who start off their homeless experience, their homeless journey, perfectly sane, perfectly stable, but sleeplessness, abuse, fatigue, burnout, just despair. It sets in real quick. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but if you've ever gone 2 or 3 nights without having a really good night's sleep, like I know my daughter, I was sharing with someone, I think I was sharing with Amanda earlier this week. My daughter, we didn't realize she was that she was allergic to milk, like dairy products, until like she was a year old. We did not sleep well for the first year of my daughter's life. I can tell you that if you did an evaluation of my mental state at that time, I probably would not have passed. I probably would have qualified for some form of disorder at that time because of lack of sleep. And homeless folks average 2 to 4 hours a night. Even if you're sleeping in a shelter, you're surrounded by people and you don't know those people. And they're snoring and they're moving around and they're jostling and they're like, you can't actually relax. And then if you're on the sidewalk, you have people walking past you. You have rodents, you have roaches, you have people, there are people in the street who are assaulted by random strangers just because they're there, they're vulnerable. So there's this element of mental illness and mental health that is directly correlated to circumstance that, again, when we look at it and say, oh, they're all mentally ill, we just need to get them, put them away in a hospital, which is what some people seem to believe. It's not productive. It's not helpful. So I've identified those 4 as sort of the main ones. And again, there's a lot of subcategories and stuff, but I think that if we can wrap our heads around the fact that those are stigmas and stereotypes, we can actually make a difference in getting engaged and doing something about it. I know that was a lot, sorry. I wrote a book on this, so forgive me if I'm...
What questions? Anybody have any questions?
It's a wonderful question. So I basically believe that people who are experiencing homelessness often are suffering from despair, not disinterest, which is an important distinction. Because if you assume that people in the street are there because they're disinterested in help, you're going to end up you're not going to offer them help. And if you think that they're disinterested in help, then you're going to offer them help in a way that is more coercive rather than relational. Because you're trying to solve an issue of this person not wanting help rather than solving the issue of connecting this person to the need that they actually have. And so as an organization, what we try to do is we try to start by just creating a space where our neighbors who are experiencing homelessness are welcomed with dignity. We offer them customer service. We just try to make it welcome. The expression I would say is we want to help them feel normal for just a few minutes even, where we treat them like a customer rather than as a dependent. And so for us, that's like the beginning step of saying, okay, how do we create a space where they feel welcome? But then, just as importantly, is how do we then find out what their most urgent needs are? So a lot of folks in the street are being surveyed, they're being engaged by people all the time. There's outreach folks who are showing up, taking pictures of them. This is all happening all the time through the city. What we try to do differently is we try to make it our approach based on sort of a needs assessment of like what they self-disclose. So we have what's called a pre-screen sheet. It's just, again, it's an optional survey that we offer with our volunteers and our guests. So as people come through, because they hear the music and they hear there's free food and there's like super fun environment, they're walking through, hopefully they're feeling cared for and seen, and then we can ask the question in that context of, where would you like to be a year from now? What if everything could go right for you, what would that look like? And what we can then do is when the person says, oh, I need an apartment, or I want a job, or I want to be restored to my kids, I want to get my kids back, or I want to, whatever the situation is, then we can say, okay, how do we develop a plan to help you get there? And what we do as an organization is we bring other nonprofits, other service providers, both through the city and through private nonprofit, private NGOs and stuff, to come and serve with us to create a one-stop shop. So if I'm at all of our outreach locations that we set up every single week, we have multiple organizations there with us, so that if I'm meeting with somebody and I'm saying, hey, where do you want to be in a year? What, if everything could go right in your life, what is that? And they're like, oh, I want to go here, or I need my benefits, or I need food stamps, or I need whatever. I can say, great, let me actually introduce you to someone who can help you with that. And then what we try to do is we try to have people who will then wrap around with that person so that we can make sure that when we do send them someplace, they actually arrive and are expected. Because a lot of folks end up going to Bellevue, for example. So the intake center for men who are experiencing homelessness is in Bellevue for single men. If I just send you to Bellevue with no explanation, no training, no prep, you may walk in the door and then turn around and walk right out. Happens every day. So what we try to do is we try to like build sort of a structure of help to help them know what to expect, to help them understand what the process is going to be, and then we try to give them our phone number, our contact information, or another partner so that they have an advocate. So when they meet that person on that intake process who starts asking questions they don't like so much, they can say, no, just talk to me, call Josiah and see, and he can explain what's going on. So we kind of create this web of care where we can not only bring other organizations to the people we serve, but then we can advocate for that handoff so that the handoff happens smoothly. And what we've seen is that this is an effective approach. It's an effective approach to start with the person where they are and ask them what they're willing to accept rather than to tell them what they need to do. Because unfortunately, homeless folks are often treated like children. Go here, do that, ask for this, stand there, wait, call this number, and they're just told that. Instead of saying, okay, what can we do? What would you accept? What kind of help or living situation would you appreciate? So we've had a lot of success getting people into single and double rooms and safe havens over the last 5 months because we've partnered with NILAG, New York Legal Assistance Group. And so we connect between NILAG and our caseworkers. We can actually advocate for people to get them into places where they will gratefully and with gratitude accept the help we're offering. But it all starts with that relationship component. So we are not funded by the city. We do not get any help from the city. We're sort of like this separate private entity. Now that means that we can help people access city services, but we also can help people access faith-based services and other services that the city usually will not refer people to. So we kind of end up functioning in the space as sort of like these brokers of goodwill, where we can meet someone and say, okay, who do I need to call? What relationship can I connect people to? And our vision for this really begins with the fact that how would I want a family member of mine to be helped in this situation? If this was my brother, if this was my nephew, if this was my friend, if this was my daughter, what kind of help would I want them to get? And it's not just, here's a cup of soup, here's a flyer, good luck with your life. It's, no, let me try to help connect the dots for you. So for the person who's just walking the streets, you can find out where these services are located. You can research where these programs are. And actually, I brought with me today a bunch of cards that fit in your wallet. They're wallet size and they're foldable, so you can actually have those with you. And if you see someone panhandling or you see someone in trouble, you can say, hey, here's an organization that can maybe help you get connected to services. And you can get a free meal and get a free pair of socks and maybe make a friend while you're there. And so if we can give those to you, have those in your pocket at all times. When you engage someone, if you want to include $1, or you want to include a gift card, or you want to include something to bless that person and be generous, that's a beautiful thing. But the idea is we want to be able to create contact points between the people in need and the resources that they need, and make sure that the connection point is really solid. So that's one thing that we try to do. I hope I answered your question. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, the first thing for me is I think I would encourage everyone to recognize your own limitations. I have yet to meet a person who is acting out of guilt who does a lot of good. And so I'm not interested in trying to make someone engage their homeless neighbors because they feel bad. There are so many people in need, you couldn't possibly help all of them. It's just impossible. Like I literally walking to a meeting. Our office is Elizabeth. I take the train into Penn Station, and then I find my subway, and I get myself to the meeting somehow. That's usually my routine. I'll pass 20 to 30 people who are in need just going from my office to the meeting place. And it's impossible to help everybody. And so I would start by just recognizing that you are finite, and it's okay. It's not your responsibility to help everybody. But I would say that there are things that you can recognize that you have to offer in those situations. So if you see someone in need, I really believe in knocking on people's doors before you walk in. This is something that I've experienced personally when, the delivery guy rings the doorbell and my dog starts barking his head off, and I have that moment on the couch where I'm like, should I get up and answer the door, or do I just want them to go away? Usually my answer is I want them to go away. But I have the luxury of a door to be able to make that distinction. Homeless folks don't usually have that. They don't have a door. So how do you knock on their door in a way that acknowledges them but also doesn't force yourself upon them and assume that what they want to do? So I encourage people to just do little things like eye contact and a smile, which encourages some kind of engagement. Eye contact and a smile, saying hello, how are you? Sometimes people are just like, they respond really negatively, and it's like, okay, well, that person is not interested in company at the moment. If you try to engage someone, you smile, hey, how are you doing today? And they curse at you. Then you're like, okay, door's shut. I'm just going to go to the next house. All good. So that's one thing I would say, is just recognizing that you can only do so much, and also, but making an effort to acknowledge and smile and meet them as a human being. So that's the first thing I would say. The other thing I would say is making sure that when you engage with them, you can start off by giving your name before you ask for theirs. I've found this to be very helpful. A lot of homeless folks are very skeptical when someone asks for their name, because they're like, what do you want to know? Why do you want to know? Why, where are you, who asked? Who called and checked on me? Am I getting moved? Is there a warrant out? So I usually start by just offering my name first, and then exchanging, and then asking or I'll say, what do your friends call you? Which I found to be a very good entryway, because if someone's like, oh, I don't really want to give you my full name, well, what do your friends call you? All right. Ice Pick, Mickey Mouse, whatever, it doesn't matter, but like, what do your friends call you? And then my goal for that conversation is to say, like, let me try to learn one thing about this person's situation. Where are you, are you staying somewhere nearby? Are you from this area? Do you have any hobbies? What do you like to do in your spare time? Are you an artist? Like, just engage on a relational level. And then what I would always like to try to have is I try to carry around a new pair of socks, or a toiletry kit with me, or a gift card. And then I'll ask the person, hey, would you be interested? I'll never make assumptions. I always say, would you be interested in maybe this $5 gift card and like a pair of socks? I know it's random. I don't just offer socks to everybody I see. It's weird. But I happen to have this new pair. Is that something you'd benefit from? Or you know of anyone who would benefit from? And what I've found is most people who are panhandling or people who are engaging are very receptive and, oh yeah, that'd be amazing. Thank you so much. And so I just really start there with something very practical after I go through the relational piece. And then again, if you're seeing this person for the first time ever, and you're not sure if you're ever going to see them again, that's where I think having that resource of, okay, this may be a very short conversation. Here's the information of places. I happen to have been at this workshop. I know this group. They might be able to help you. I really believe in underselling and over-delivering. A lot of people who are experiencing homelessness have had so many doors shut in their face. They get information, it's bad information. They call a number, it's the wrong number. They get just bounced around. And so just being able to say, hey, there's a possibility here. Let me try to see if I can't get you connected. And then I would always, try to end with, like, or find out, is this something that are you here a lot? Is there anything that, hopes and dreams are always good. I like to find out what their hopes and dreams are. Because again, I think that a lot of times homelessness is a consequence of hopelessness, in the sense that once you become hopeless, there's no point in trying anymore. And so just trying to reignite that fire of, hey, what did you want to be when you were a kid? Like, what did you want to be when you grow up? But at the same time, I would always encourage people to use wisdom about that engagement. If you're by yourself, if you're at if you're at Penn Station where there's like 10 people around who are going to see you giving something to somebody, again, being aware of your surroundings is very important. But I would also, again, I think that there are ways to build relationships slowly. I try to tell people, like, think about it like you're meeting someone at the grocery store. Again, you may shop at the same grocery store. That doesn't mean you're family. So just finding ways to connect on that level, and then being wise about your own boundaries and what you're comfortable with, and starting small is really good. But there are also loads of trainings, like mental health first aid is a great training you can do online. Highly recommend if you're interested in learning more about how to engage someone who might be struggling with an acute mental crisis. Mental health first aid is a great resource. I also suggest people carry around Narcan. This is overdose prevention material that you can get. This stuff saves lives. If you can get trained on how to stop an overdose, that's a good thing, because right now overdoses are killing 100,000 Americans every year. Many of the homeless folks that are dying in the streets are dying as a result of overdose with fentanyl being laced into everything these days. So having Narcan on you is always a good thing as well. So the big picture answer to your question is really just being as prepared as you can be, recognizing that homelessness is now a reality. This is a reality. And so we want to live not in denial of our reality, but in acceptance of our reality, and try to be as helpful as we can with the people that we can help. The other stupid thing I tell people is leaving 15 minutes earlier than you need to. You'll find if you leave 15 minutes earlier than you need to, and then you meet that person, you're not sitting there trying to oh my gosh, I gotta be in a hurry, or I gotta, if you're in a hurry to get from point A to point B, you will miss. I don't know if you guys are fans of The Office. I'm a huge fan of that show. And he has, the lead character of The Office has a sign on his wall that's a quote from Wayne Gretzky that says, "You will miss 100% of the shots you don't take," except he quotes it Michael Scott, not Wayne Gretzky. I would take that same thing and add a third name. So Wayne Gretzky's quote, Michael Scott, and then Josiah Haken. There's, you will miss 100% of the homeless people that you do not see. And so I would also encourage you to just consider just starting by opening your eyes and looking for people and trying to identify folks who are struggling. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, so this is just the challenge that people are facing right now. Now, does he have a voucher from the shelter, do you know? So if you go, so the idea, yeah. So, his experience is very common, which is sad. I mean, what you just described is one of the problems with the system that we're trying to operate in. So they did increase the voucher status. So there's something called a City FEPS voucher. Some of you probably don't know what that is. Basically, if you go through the shelter system, that's the fastest way to apply for this voucher that is supposed to help you pay rent. And that voucher is supposed to also help cover the move-in fees, the brokerage fees, and all that stuff. The problem is that a lot of landlords are very hesitant to make deals with people who have vouchers, because back in 2009, there were a lot of people who were on the hook with a program under the Bloomberg administration that ended up defaulting and just canceling the program. And so a lot of landlords ended up getting just evicting people en masse and never got paid. And so there's a lot of people who are very hesitant. They don't trust the city to actually pay their bills. And so there's a dynamic where landlords will, if they will look for an excuse not to consider someone who has a voucher, and they will often try to manipulate and say, well, if you can give me cash, or if there's another way to work it out. But it's a shady practice, and technically, no landlord it's legally allowed to discriminate against people with vouchers. The problem is that they find a lot of it was the real estate agent who, yeah. Yeah, so like again, you find people in these different, like there's predatory behavior all over the place. Because the problem is you have people like the young man you're describing or the young person you're describing who is vulnerable. He doesn't have the ability to know what his rights are, what the obligations are, and so you end up playing this game with people who are much more knowledgeable and in power, and they can end up discriminating against people who don't have it. Yeah. Exactly, and honestly, that's the other big problem in this city, in this country. Actually, it's a country thing, not a city thing. A lack of affordable housing. There's just not enough housing. There just isn't. I think I saw a real estate company I was reading yesterday said that there currently is 6 million fewer homes in America than there are people who need them. So we're like 6 million homes short, or 5 to 6. This was according to a real estate company that. I forget the name of it. I can find it if anyone wants to check my sources. But there's just not enough housing for the population of people that need it. And then the process of getting that housing up and running and actually effective and accessible to the people that need it, it's like there's just all kinds of bureaucracy and problems challenges that make it difficult for people to make any forward progress. So it's, again, you're fighting uphill both ways. You're doing everything you can, but obviously, again, you're working within a system that's struggling. Yes, ma'am. It's a great question. Again, I think anytime you invite everybody to a meal or a party, everybody shows up. So the best thing I think is to think about what kind of environment you are getting yourself into, and what kind of environment will you be able to create in that setting. So for example, I don't think it's wise to just have two people go out by themselves and try to serve food on a table to random passersby at a random time. There are things that you can get to help you kind of mitigate that, like there's safe serve certifications, there's, again, all the trainings and stuff that you can get to be able to turn a food distribution into a more holistic experience that's a little more controlled. I do encourage, for our organization, we always have at least 4 staff members who are trained, who do this all the time, every day, who are on site, and they are all trained in de-escalation, and they're trained in how to like maneuver those situations. And so that way volunteers can come up underneath sort of our covering, and then we can provide that level of organization and structure that will hopefully avoid those kind of situations. The other thing that just keep in mind is that, again, people in the street, what I have found is that a lot of folks are there in part because they were never given the chance to learn the social requirements that many of us just take for granted. So there's a lot of people in the street who don't know how to respectfully and kindly speak to someone that they are engaging for the first time, especially if someone of the opposite sex, or there's someone that there's a chance that they can instigate something or have a little fun with this random person who's a random do-gooder. I have seen a lot of, occasionally I've seen people in the street kind of mess with our volunteers. There was one time where a volunteer was handing out a brochure, and this guy in the street took a brochure that she handed him, and he took a bite out of it and yelled. And then he walked away and he winked at the person next to him. Now the volunteer was terrified. The volunteer was like this 19-year-old girl from Ohio who was like on a service trip. She'd never been to New York. She had no idea what she was getting herself into. And he was clearly just messing. He was messing with her. Now he's bored. He's got nothing else to do. He's just being a problem. But again, in that same context, I'm able in that situation, if I'm there every week, I know the guy. I know what he's trying to do. I can step in and be like, dude, come on, knock it off. That's inappropriate. Like if I'm on outreach and there's a guy who's saying inappropriate things to one of my volunteers, I have the credibility and I have the knowledge of the relationship to be able to engage that person in a way that says, come on, man, knock it off. Like, you can do better. You need to apologize to her right now. I've said that to people in the street. I'd be like, hey, you need to go, you're being mean to my volunteers. You're being disrespectful. You need to go apologize. And because I have that credibility and that relational capital, I can do that. That's why if you just show up randomly at a random spot and you start giving stuff away, it can be problematic because you don't know what's going on in that space at that time. And Port Authority is another area where there's a lot of things happening around Port Authority. A lot of activity that is not necessarily productive, at least not for people who are, trying to be productive. Port Authority is a very I've spent lots of time around Port Authority, specifically on Saturday nights. We had an outreach from 10 to midnight on right outside Port Authority for about 3 years, and it was a little bit crazy sometimes. But again, because we were there every week, we knew the police, we knew the locals, we knew the outreach teams, we knew the people. We had a lot of credibility. We were able to build on and lean on that in that situation. So I would always encourage, if you're looking to get involved and you want to give back, there are lots of organizations you can jump in with and you can serve with that will come with that sort of covering. That way it's not your responsibility to be the bouncer. It's not your responsibility. You can just worry about the food. And there's a context and there's an expectation of behavior that we can kind of maintain. So I would always encourage people to consider joining up with another group, or if you're going to do your own thing, planning it out ahead of time, and like sending out flyers. Like, so for example, if you want to serve on a Saturday at a different location, I know you mentioned a monthly thing that you're doing. Like, that monthly thing can be really cool if you can find a location that you can be consistent in, that you can start advertising and people know what to expect. You can have some ground rules, and it can create a much better experience for the volunteers than just showing up at a random sidewalk with free food, which can lead to some chaotic situations for sure. I don't know if that answers your question. Absolutely. So this is a very interesting conversation. Like, this topic is very interesting to me for a variety of reasons. One is that it's true, homeless is becoming more pejorative. It's becoming sort of a negative word because it's used to, like, because really if a person doesn't have a home, how do you define a home? So that's why people are using words like housed now, like people are unhoused or houseless. The one caveat I would say, so I would start off by, we can all assume or start with the premise that people are not defined by their living situation. One of my friends named Deetra, who is sort of famous, she was featured by Humans of New York a few years ago, and she kind of blew up, and she's a good friend of mine. And I interviewed her for my podcast, and I asked her for one thing that she could convince people of about homelessness. And she said, the one thing I would ask people is to recognize that my address does not define me. I'm not defined by my address. And so there is an element of that in our language that matters. So that's why I try to use people, people experience homelessness. They're not homeless. It's not a state of being. Now, that being said, I will also admit that if you talk to people who are actually experiencing homelessness, they will often refer to themselves as homeless. And some advocates will actually make the case that by watering down the words we use, it actually makes it less of a priority. And so if we're not calling it like it is, then it takes away a sense of urgency. So for example, I don't know if you know this, but homelessness, as an issue, is actually takes years off your life. The average life expectancy for someone who is experiencing homelessness is 20 years less than the national average. So there is urgency. There needs to be a level of urgency with this issue because it is costing people their lives. So I do think that sometimes when we try to maneuver the words to a place where they're almost like a massage, we can sometimes miss out on the urgency of the moment. And sometimes people who are in very comfortable spaces telling other people how they should or shouldn't be referred to, I find that to be a bit ironic as well sometimes. Because if you actually talk to people who are experiencing homelessness, like, bro, I'm homeless, just call it like it is. And it's like, so I'm like, oh, I'm trying to be all respectful. And they're like, yeah, I'm homeless. Like, get over yourself. So there's an element also of I think inside and outside language. I do agree that, so in my book, I opened it up by talking about how I will refer to people as a variety of things. I will say some are experiencing homelessness, some are unhoused, some are sheltered, some are, and I try to be more specific about their situation. Because what I believe that does is it also allows us to understand the complexity of the issue, that not everybody is going through the same thing. And so the language that we use needs to reflect that complexity. So I will never tell someone this is what you should say, because that person might meet someone who's in the street who's like, no, I'm homeless. And it's and I don't want that person going no, sir, you're experiencing homelessness. Come on, really? That person's the one sleeping outdoors, not you. If they want to call themselves homeless, that's their prerogative. So I would also say the language piece of it needs to be filtered through whatever the person wants to be referred to as. And so for me, that's the language piece that I think is important. But again, I appreciate the conversation because it is, again, because of the stigma and because of the stereotypes, language does reflect that. And so you have words like bum, you have vagabond, you have bum, people that there's all these really negative tropes that people use that are obviously super destructive. And so the language we use needs to affirm the humanity of these folks, not take it away. But I also means part of that affirmation of their humanity, I believe, starts by letting the person tell you how they want to be referred, giving them that dignity of saying, if you call yourself homeless, okay, you're homeless. If you call yourself unhoused or traveling or whatever, I'll call you whatever you want, I don't care. Because for me, it's about actually connecting with you as a person. So again, homeless folks are just like anybody else. If you think of it that way, like they're people, and like people, I teach my kids that people are of all walks of life can be unpredictable. It's just a reality. People, like you don't know if a person is safe until you really get to know that person. And so there's wisdom in assuming that the stranger you meet on the subway is, trust but verify. You hope the best for that person, but if the person is not a safe person, you don't want to put yourself in a situation where you're unnecessarily entering into a risky position just because that person may or may not be homeless. And so I do think that there's an element of that when it comes to how we engage and how we think about these issues. I really believe, again, that we try to start small, and boundaries are super healthy. So one of the things that I've done, or what I bring when City Relief goes to a church or goes to a community, we try to provide contact cards that people can use when they're giving away things. One thing that I would love I've seen done that works really well is sometimes if you have an allowance or you have like a budgeted amount of money that you get on a weekly basis, you can actually be prepared on the train with $1 that's for you to give away. And that also includes one of these outreach cards. So like if you're on the train a lot and you see someone coming through like, excuse me, ladies and gentlemen, I don't want to bother you, but I want to sing you a song or have a dance or ask you for help because I'm struggling. And like that's the kind of person where it's really great to have that resource card and like $1. And you'd be like, hey, so good to see you. I want to give you this $1, and I also want to give you this resource card. There's this organization called City Relief. We'd love you to come by and get a delicious meal and make a friend and then get connected to resources if you need that. Super simple, super short, super contained. Again, it's always good to do that if you're not by yourself specifically. Sometimes it's helpful if you have another person with you. I would always say, again, use wisdom in terms of your own safety, what you feel comfortable doing. I think that's really important. The other thing that we try to do is we try to provide, so back at the back there, I also will have books that I wrote. So I wrote a book called, what's my book called? Oh, Neighbors with No Doors, which is appropriate. And then how to engage with your homeless neighbors. And I basically try to encourage people to make a difference by thinking about this issue more in very practical terms. So that's one thing we want to be able to do is empower you guys to be able to engage with the folks that you see in the street. It's super important. So all that to say is, again, I would always start small. Again, you don't have to have an age limit. Like my daughter's 11, I would give her the resource card and $1 if I'm with her, say go ahead and give that to that person. I would try to, there's also another thing you can do with youth, with young people, is you can assemble hygiene kits and toiletry kits. You can have people actually put things together for folks in the street. One of my favorite stories, if you go to our website if you go to YouTube and look for City Relief, there's a gentleman on those videos called Ray Sean. We have stories from people that we've worked with, and Ray Sean tells a story in one of those videos of how a young person, a kid, with his dad approached him on one of his worst days, and the kid actually gave him a toiletry kit and some snack bars, and that got him through that day. And now he's on the other side of it, years later, he still looks back and remembers that kid. Who helped him. And so I would say you're not too young to get involved. But I do think that as parents, we also have to practice and provide some oversight in terms of when it's appropriate for different age groups to get involved in different things. So just again, using judgment around your own comfort level and your own family, community, and what you can do and what you're being called to. It's really important. There you go.